Subscribe to my YouTube channel, share it with your friends, and comment your thoughts. Mira shifted uncomfortably in the back seat, her fingers lightly tapping against the worn upholstery of the taxi. The heat outside was unbearable, and even with the air conditioning, she couldn't shake the feeling of restlessness that clung to her. Every time she moved, it seemed like something was off, something she couldn't quite place. She was adjusting the strap of her bra when she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the side mirror. It wasn't just a glance, but a look at herself that somehow felt like an intrusion. Her mind raced. Mira wasn't one to care too much about her appearance, not when she had so many other things to worry about. She didn't fit the typical mold of beauty or glamour that the world seemed obsessed with. But today was different. Today, something felt off. Her body, cramped in the back seat of the taxi, felt out of place, and she couldn't ignore the discomfort. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, but the way the mirror caught her image made her feel exposed, as though she had no control over how the world saw her. Her fingers worked in haste, trying to adjust the strap that had begun to dig into her skin. It was something small, something she could have fixed later, but in that moment, it felt like it consumed all her attention. It wasn't just about the discomfort, it was about how vulnerable she felt in that fleeting moment. The taxi, the mirror, the reflection, it all felt too much. As she adjusted the strap, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of being watched. The street outside seemed oddly quiet, the noise of traffic fading as if the world had momentarily paused. That's when she noticed him. He was standing by the street just beyond the taxi. His gaze was fixed directly on her. At first, she thought it was just her mind playing tricks on her. But no, there it was again, a lingering, intense stare that felt like it had cut through the car's tinted windows. Her heart skipped a beat. She quickly stopped adjusting, her breath catching in her throat. What was he looking at? Why was he staring at her like that? The stranger's eyes widened, and he froze, as if the sight of her had completely taken him off guard. She quickly turned her face away, feeling the heat rush to her cheeks. She wanted to hide, to disappear into the folds of the car's interior. She wasn't someone who enjoyed attention, especially not from men who had the luxury of standing outside on a warm afternoon while she was cramped in the back seat of a beat-up taxi. But just as she was about to look away, the taxi driver did something unexpected. "Hey, I think he's waiting for you," the driver mumbled, his voice laced with curiosity. Mira's heart sank. She turned around again to see the man still standing there, his gaze fixed on her. The world seemed to slow down in that instant. The man's stare was so intense it almost felt like an accusation. She could feel every second stretching, making her more aware of every tiny detail. The way her hair felt out of place, how the fabric of her clothes clung uncomfortably to her skin, and how every movement of hers now felt like it was under a magnifying glass. The taxi driver was still looking through the rearview mirror, his eyes shifting back and forth between her and the man on the street. "Looks like he wants to talk to you," he said, almost too nonchalantly for Mira's liking. She felt a lump form in her throat. "No," she whispered, almost to herself. She didn't want to deal with this. Not now, not like this. She was just trying to get to the small cafe where she worked. Her shift started in less than an hour, and she needed to get there to make a few bucks to get through the week. That's all that mattered. She didn't have time for interruptions, certainly not from someone who had no idea who she was or what her life was like. But the man was still standing there. He hadn't moved. His eyes remained fixed on her. There was something about the way he stood, composed, relaxed, yet somehow alert, that made her pause. He didn't look like someone who had any reason to be here. He didn't belong in her world. She, a girl who could barely scrape together enough money for a decent meal, and he, standing in a crisp white shirt, hands neatly tucked into his pockets. His expensive watch gleamed under the sun's rays, and then, just as quickly as the uncomfortable moment began, the man made a move. Slowly, almost deliberately, he began walking towards the taxi. Mira's breath hitched in her chest. What did he want from her? The taxi driver glanced at Mira's face in the rearview mirror. She could see the questioning look in his eyes. "You want me to stop?" he asked, his voice low. Mira wasn't sure what to do. She didn't know if she should tell the driver to keep going, to leave the man behind, but there was something in the man's eyes, a strange mixture of curiosity and maybe even kindness, that made her pause. What did he want? And why was he standing there, seemingly waiting for her to acknowledge him? She didn't answer the driver right away. Instead, she found herself looking back at the man, now only a few feet away from the taxi. The stranger was almost there, his steps slow, deliberate. As he reached the side of the car, Mira could feel her heart racing. She couldn't explain it. Why was she nervous? Why was her stomach flipping? There was nothing about this man that should have scared her, yet everything about him felt different from the world she knew. He stopped right beside her window. Mira didn't know if she should roll the window down or just ignore him. She was too self-conscious to do anything. But the man didn't wait for her to make up her mind. Instead, he bent down slightly, leaning in toward the window. His voice was calm, almost soothing, as he said, "Are you okay?" Mira didn't respond right away. She was caught off guard, not sure how to react to someone speaking to her so directly, so openly. She wasn't used to this. She wasn't used to attention like this. He continued, "I saw you from across the street. You looked like you were struggling a little. Can I help you with anything?" Mira blinked, processing his words. Was this some kind of joke? She had never been in a situation like this. A stranger offering help to someone like her. It didn't make sense, but as she looked into his eyes, something inside her shifted. There was no malice there, no arrogance, no judgment, just sincerity. A sincerity that made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, he wasn't like the others who had passed her by without a second glance. "I'm fine," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Thank you." The man seemed to hesitate for a moment before nodding. "All right," he said, "but if you ever need anything, I'll be around." With that, he took a step back, and Mira could hear his footsteps retreating. She watched as he slowly walked down the street, his figure growing smaller in the rearview mirror. Her mind was still racing, still processing what had just happened. Why had he stopped? Why had he offered help? And why had it felt like a moment she would never forget? The taxi driver, sensing the tension in the air, didn't say anything. The silence between them stretched out as the cab continued on its way. But Mira wasn't focused on the road anymore. She couldn't stop thinking about the man, about his eyes, his offer, and the way he had left without demanding anything in return. What kind of person was he? And what did he want from her? Mira's thoughts were still racing as the taxi made its way through the busy streets. The city seemed to hum around her, people walking quickly, their faces expressions of urgency. The world outside was moving at its usual pace, but inside the car, everything felt suspended. Her mind kept replaying the brief encounter with the stranger. She tried to focus, but her thoughts kept drifting back to him. The look in his eyes, the way he had stood there, almost waiting for her response. She had told him she was fine, but the truth was, she wasn't. Nothing about the way she felt that day was fine. The weight of the day, the struggles she faced. Every day just to make ends meet. It all felt heavier now. She couldn't escape it. The taxi driver kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, but Mira didn't want to engage with him. She didn't want him to ask questions she didn't have answers to. She had never been someone who sought attention, let alone help from a stranger, but the man's words had stuck with her. "Are you okay?" It had been such a simple question, but it felt so foreign to her. She was used to brushing off people who used to dealing with everything on her own. But there was something different about him. His tone hadn't been pitying or dismissive. It had been sincere. She didn't know what to make of it. Maybe she was overthinking it. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter meant something. The rest of the ride passed in a blur. She couldn't remember much of the scenery outside the window, nor did she care. When the taxi finally pulled up to the small cafe where she worked, she stepped out, still lost in thought. The city's hustle and bustle, the clamor of passing cars, the laughter and chatter from the sidewalks, it all seemed so distant. She walked into the cafe, the familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee and pastries instantly enveloping her. It should have felt comforting, but today it didn't. She walked to the back to change into her work uniform, her movements slow, almost robotic. It was the same routine every day: serve coffee, take orders, clean tables, and go home, hoping for a few hours of rest before doing it all again. But something was different now. Mira could still feel the stranger's presence lingering, as if his eyes were still on her, even though he was long gone. She tried to push the thoughts away, but they kept creeping back. Who was he? Why had he asked to help her? What was his story? Her shift started with the usual mundane tasks. She smiled at customers, handed out cups of coffee, wiped down tables, everything she'd done 100 times before. But today, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Around 2 hours into her shift, the cafe door chimed, signaling the arrival of a new customer. Mira glanced up from the counter, ready to greet them, but her eyes froze as she caught sight of him, the same man from earlier, the stranger, the one who had made her feel so exposed and yet so strangely noticed. He stepped inside with the same composed demeanor, his presence calm yet commanding. He wore a well-tailored suit, and for a moment Mira thought he didn't belong here. The cafe was small, cozy, filled with the scent of freshly baked goods and the hum of quiet conversations. It was the kind of place where people came to unwind, not somewhere someone like him would likely choose to enter. His eyes found hers immediately, and just like before, it was like no one else was in the room. The air between them felt thick, charged with a strange energy. Mira couldn't explain why, but she found herself frozen in place, unable to look away. She wasn't sure if he had come in to seek her out or if it was pure coincidence, but there was no mistaking it. He had walked straight up to the counter, and now there he was, standing right in front of her. Mira's breath hitched. "Hi, welcome to the cafe," she stammered, trying to regain some sense of composure. The man gave her a small smile, his gaze softening. "Thank you," he said smoothly, his voice warm, but there was something almost guarded about it. Don't take a black coffee, please." Mira nodded, her hands moving on autopilot as she prepared the order. The coffee machine hummed in the background, but to Mira the noise seemed muffled, distant. Her entire focus was on the man in front of her. She tried to calm herself, to remind herself that he was just another customer, but it was hard to shake the sense of unease that had settled into her chest. As she handed him the coffee, their fingers brushed for a split second. It was brief, barely noticeable, but to Mira it felt like an electric jolt running through her body. She quickly pulled her hand away, her heart racing. What was happening to her? "Thank you," he said again, his eyes lingering on hers for a moment longer than necessary. "How's your day going?" Mira was taken aback. It was the second time he had asked about her. Most people never bothered to ask, let alone care, but this man was different. He had an air of sophistication, a confidence that was palpable, and yet there was something oddly familiar about the way he spoke. It was almost as if he genuinely wanted to know. It's fine," she replied, her voice shaky. She didn't know why she was telling him that. In truth, it hadn't been fine. It hadn't been fine in weeks. But she wasn't about to. open up to this stranger. She didn't know why he was here or what he wanted from her. Just the usual, you know. The man nodded slowly, then gave her a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I hope it gets better," he said, and Mira couldn't help but notice the sincerity in his words. He turned to walk away, but then stopped and looked back at her. "You know, I didn't get to introduce myself earlier. My name's Alex, and if you ever need anything, you can always reach me." Mira blinked, trying to process what he had said. What did he mean by that? Why was he offering help again when they barely knew each other? She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but before she could, Alex turned and walked toward the door, leaving the cafe as quietly as he had entered. Mira stood there for a long moment, staring after him, feeling a strange knot tighten in her stomach. Was it all just a coincidence? Had he really just come in for a coffee, or was there something more to this encounter? Her thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of the cafe's phone. She quickly turned, taking a deep breath to steady herself. It wasn't time to dwell on things she couldn't understand. She had to focus on the task at hand. But Alex's words lingered. "You can always reach me." What did he mean by that? And why did it feel like something was pulling her toward him, like there was a reason this was happening? The following days felt like a blur for Mira. The mundane rhythm of her life, wake up, work at the cafe, try to find time to rest, seemed to spin on, indifferent to her inner turmoil. But something inside her had shifted ever since that encounter with Alex. She couldn't explain it, but it felt as though he had somehow become a part of her world, despite the fact that they barely knew each other. His words echoed in her mind long after he left the cafe. "If you ever need anything, you can always reach me." It had been a simple offer, nothing special. But for some reason, it felt different. She'd heard words like that before, hollow and meaningless. But Alex's words, his tone, the way he said them, carried a weight that she couldn't shake. She wasn't sure why it mattered. She barely knew him. In fact, she didn't know anything about him, but somehow he had made her feel like she mattered. He had made her feel seen. Mira had tried to ignore the lingering thoughts of him, focusing on the usual routine of her life. She worked long hours at the cafe, serving coffee, taking orders, cleaning tables. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was the only work she had. Still, her mind kept drifting back to that moment when Alex had walked into the cafe, his eyes meeting hers in a way that made everything else around her disappear. She couldn't get the image of him out of her mind. As the days passed, Mira began to notice something strange. Every now and then she would catch a glimpse of him, his face briefly appearing in the crowd as he walked by, always at a distance, but never too far away. It was as if he was somehow always just there, in the background of her life. It wasn't like he was stalking her, not exactly, but there was a constant presence, a feeling that he was somehow watching over her, or at least paying attention to her in a way that no one else ever had. And then, one afternoon, it happened again. Mira was working the late shift at the cafe. The sun had long since set, and the streets outside were illuminated by the glow of streetlights. The cafe was quieter than usual, with only a few patrons scattered around the tables. Mira was cleaning the counter when she heard the door chime. She looked up, and there he was again. Alex. Her heart skipped a beat. It had only been a few days since their last encounter, but it felt like an eternity. She hadn't seen him at all since that moment in the cafe, and now he was standing right in front of her again, his gaze fixed on her. He smiled as he approached the counter, and Mira felt a strange flutter in her chest. "Hey, Mira," he said, his voice warm and casual, as though they were old friends. "I see you're working hard as usual." Mira couldn't find the words. At first, it felt odd seeing him here after everything that had happened. "Hi," she finally managed to say, her voice slightly shaky. "What can I get you?" Alex glanced around the cafe for a moment before his gaze settled back on her. "I'll just have a water, please." Mira nodded, unsure of what to say. She reached for a glass and filled it with water, her hands trembling slightly. It wasn't that she was nervous. It was something deeper, something that she couldn't quite explain. It was as if Alex had the ability to make her feel both comfortable and completely out of control at the same time. As she handed him the water, their fingers brushed again. This time it was longer, more deliberate, and Mira couldn't help but feel a rush of warmth spread through her. She quickly pulled her hand back, but Alex didn't seem to notice. He just smiled, taking the glass from her. "Thanks," he said, his voice low. "You know, I've been meaning to ask you something." Mira felt her stomach tighten. "What's that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex leaned in slightly, his expression serious now. "I don't mean to sound too forward, but you seem like someone who's been through a lot. I just wanted to make sure you're okay. I know we don't know each other, but if you ever need someone to talk to—" Mira's heart pounded in her chest. She hadn't expected this, not at all. It felt as though Alex could see right through her, as though he knew exactly what was going on inside her head. But she couldn't let him in, not like this. She couldn't open up to him. She couldn't afford to. "I'm fine," she said quickly, too quickly. "Really? Thanks for asking, though." Alex didn't seem convinced. He studied her for a moment, his brow furrowing slightly. "If you say so," he said, but there was an edge to his voice now. It was almost as though he wasn't going to let this go. "But just know that I'm here, if you need anything." Mira looked away, unsure of how to respond. She didn't want to be rude, but she didn't know how to deal with him, with this situation. She had always kept her emotions in check, always kept her guard up, but something about Alex, something about the way he spoke to her, made her want to let down her walls. Before she could say anything else, Alex gave her one last look, a look that seemed to carry a silent understanding between them. Then with a soft nod, he turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving Mira standing there, her mind racing. She didn't know what to make of him. She didn't know if she could trust him. But one thing was certain. Alex had a way of making her feel things she hadn't felt in years, and that scared her. The next few days felt even more unsettling than the last. Mira couldn't stop thinking about Alex. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face. Every time she stepped outside, she half expected to see him waiting for her. His presence, both real and imagined, had begun to seep into her thoughts, invading every corner of her mind. And then one evening, she found herself walking home from the cafe, the quiet streets casting long shadows in the dim light. She was tired, both physically and mentally. The day had been long, and all she wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and forget about the world for a while. But as she walked, her thoughts kept drifting back to Alex. What was he really like? Was he just being kind? Or was there something more to it? Why did he keep showing up in her life when she wasn't ready for it? And then, as if the universe had heard her thoughts, she saw him again. He was standing by a street corner, leaning casually against a lamppost, his arms crossed. He seemed to be waiting for something or someone. Mira's heart skipped a beat, and she couldn't help but stop in her tracks. He hadn't seen her yet, but she wasn't sure if she wanted to approach him. She was too afraid of what might happen if she did. But before she could make up her mind, Alex turned, his eyes locking with hers. A smile spread across his face as he pushed off from the lamppost and walked toward her. "Mira," he said softly, his voice calm, but with an unmistakable warmth. "I didn't expect to see you here." Mira stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to say. She had never been in a situation like this, where someone's presence seemed so overwhelming, so consuming. I was just heading home," she stammered, her voice betraying her nervousness. "I know," Alex said, his tone light. "I've been meaning to walk you home. I don't think you should be walking alone this late. The city can be unpredictable, you know." Mira opened her mouth to protest, but she couldn't find the words. Part of her wanted to tell him to leave her alone, to stop following her. But another part of her, a part she didn't understand, wanted to let him, wanted to see where this was going. I don't need any help," she finally said, though her words lacked conviction. Alex smiled, unfazed by her resistance. "I don't think you do," he replied gently. "Let me at least walk you home. It's the least I can do." Mira stood there, torn. She didn't know what to do. Should she trust him? Should she let him in? Or was she just setting herself up for disappointment? In the end, the decision wasn't hers to make. Her feet moved on their own, taking her towards him, and without saying another word, she allowed him to walk beside her into the night. The days that followed were a blur for Mira. She had found herself slipping into a strange routine, one she couldn't fully explain. Every evening, without fail, Alex seemed to appear, always at just the right moment. At first she had brushed it off as coincidence, but now it was becoming harder to ignore. It was as though he had found a way to weave himself into the fabric of her life, even though he had no real reason to. She wasn't sure if she liked it or resented it. Part of her was drawn to him, to the way he made her feel seen, to the way he seemed to notice things about her that no one else ever did, but another part of her wanted to push him away. She didn't need anyone, especially someone like him, entering her life. She was used to being self-reliant, used to dealing with things on her own. But with every passing day, Alex made it harder to hold on to that sense of independence. Mira knew she should have been more guarded, more cautious. But something about the way Alex treated her, genuinely without ulterior motives, made her feel like maybe, just maybe, it was okay to let her guard down. It had been a week since the night he had walked her home. Since then, their encounters had become more frequent. He was always there, just around the corner, waiting for the moment when their paths would cross. It wasn't forced or uncomfortable. In fact, Mira found herself looking forward to seeing him, even though she tried not to. That evening, after another long shift at the cafe, Mira stepped out into the cool night air. She wasn't surprised to find Alex waiting for her near the entrance, leaning casually against the brick wall. His presence, once unexpected, had become oddly familiar, and as much as Mira tried to suppress it, she couldn't deny the feeling of warmth that surged through her whenever he was near. "Hey, Mira," Alex said with a smile, his eyes soft but purposeful. "Long day?" Mira nodded, glancing at the street behind him. The usual hustle of the city seemed distant, muted by the conversation that was unfolding between them. She shrugged, trying to play it off. "Same as always," she said, her voice casual. "Just ready to get home and relax." Alex pushed himself off the wall and took a step closer. "I get it," he said with a knowing look. "How about a walk? I know a quiet park nearby. It might help you unwind after the shift." Mira hesitated. The last thing she wanted to do after a tiring day was walk through a park with him. But at the same time, there was something strangely comforting about the idea. She found herself nodding before she even realized it. "Sure," she said, more to herself than to him. "Why not?" The two of them walked in silence for a few moments, the rhythm of their footsteps echoing against the empty streets. It was strange how easily they could be in each other's company without feeling the weight of words. Alex seemed content to let the quiet stretch between them, but Mira could feel the unspoken tension building. It wasn't uncomfortable, not exactly. It was more like an invisible thread pulling them closer, drawing them into a place neither of them had expected. As they reached the park, Alex led her down a narrow path that curved through the trees. The park was nearly deserted, the only sound being the rustling of the leaves above them and the occasional distant bark of a dog. It was peaceful, calming even, and Mira found herself taking deeper breaths, letting the fresh air clear her mind. "Have you lived here long?" Alex asked, breaking the silence. Mira glanced at him. He seemed genuinely curious, but she wasn't sure how much she wanted to share. "A few years," she said, keeping her answer short. "I moved here for work." "That's what I figured," Alex said with a soft laugh. "You seem like you've got that workaholic vibe." Mira smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I don't really have much of a choice. Bills to pay, food to buy. It's just how it is." Alex didn't reply immediately, and Mira couldn't help but wonder what was going on in his mind. It was strange, the way he seemed to understand her so well, even though they barely knew each other. But that was the thing about Alex. He didn't ask invasive questions. He didn't push. He simply listened, as if everything she said mattered, even the small details she would have usually kept to herself. They walked in silence for a while longer, before Alex stopped and turned to face her. "Mira," he began, his tone shifting, becoming more serious. "I know I don't know you well, but I feel like there's something you're not telling me. Something you're holding back." Mira froze. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready for him to dig deeper, to pry into the parts of her life she had buried so carefully. She had worked hard to keep those parts hidden, to make sure no one ever saw the cracks in her armor. "I'm fine," she said quickly, her voice a little too sharp. "There's nothing to tell." Alex didn't look convinced. His eyes held. A quiet intensity, but there was no judgment there. "I'm not trying to pressure you, Mira, but I've seen the way you carry yourself. You don't have to pretend with me." Mira took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't ready to open up, to let anyone in. Especially not someone like Alex, who seemed to have everything she didn't. The last thing she wanted was for him to pity her, to see her as weak. "I don't need help," she said, her voice wavering. "I'm fine on my own." There was a long pause as Alex studied her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he took a step toward her, closing the distance between them. "You're not alone, Mira," he said quietly. "You don't have to be." For a moment, the world around them seemed to fade away. Mira felt the weight of his words settle on her shoulders, and for the briefest second, she felt as if she could let go of the burden she had been carrying for so long. But then, just as quickly, the walls she had built around herself snapped back into place. "I don't need anyone," she said, more forcefully this time, stepping back again. "I'm fine. I've always been fine." Alex didn't push her. Further, he simply nodded as if he understood. "Okay," he said, his voice soft. "I'm not going anywhere, Mira. Whenever you're ready, you know where to find me." Mira didn't know how to respond. She wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she just nodded, her mind racing. What was it about Alex that made her feel both vulnerable and safe at the same time? Why couldn't she shake the feeling that he was somehow different from everyone else she had ever known? They walked in silence for a while longer, the park stretching out in front of them like an endless sea of trees and shadows. Mira couldn't help but feel like something was about to change, like her life was about to take an unexpected turn. But she didn't know what that meant, and she wasn't sure she was ready to find out. When they finally reached the end of the park, Alex turned to her one last time. "Take care, Mira," he said, his voice gentle. "I'll see you soon." Mira nodded, not trusting herself to say anything more. As Alex walked away, disappearing into the darkness, she stood there, her heart heavy with questions. What did all of this mean? Why had he come into her life? And why was he so determined to be there? She didn't have the answers, but one thing was certain: her life had already started to change, whether she was ready for it or not. Mira's life had never felt so complicated. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind, a series of moments she couldn't quite piece together. The cafe, the endless days, the faces that came and went. It had all been so predictable. But then Alex entered her life, and everything shifted. Every day felt different now, as though a small invisible thread connected her to something bigger than herself. She had tried to maintain her distance, to stay guarded, to keep the walls she had built around herself intact. But Alex had a way of making her feel things she wasn't sure she was ready to feel. The days that followed their walk in the park were strange. Mira found herself thinking about him constantly. Even when she was working, her mind would drift back to the moments they had shared, the conversations that had felt so real, so raw. He was persistent, yes, but not in an overbearing way. He respected her space, but he also made it clear that he was there for her whenever she needed him. And still, Mira couldn't understand why. Why did he care? Why was he so willing to step into her chaotic life and try to make a difference? It didn't make sense. He had a life of his own, a world far removed from hers. And yet somehow he kept showing up, offering help, asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. The night after their walk in the park, Mira found herself pacing her small apartment, her thoughts spiraling. She had spent the entire evening with him, and yet she felt no closer to understanding him. There were still so many unanswered questions, so many things she couldn't wrap her mind around. The sound of her phone buzzing interrupted her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, expecting it to be one of her friends or family members, but instead it was a message from Alex. "Hey, Mira, I hope you're doing okay. I've been thinking about our conversation earlier. If you ever need to talk, I'm here. Take care." Her heart skipped a beat. It was simple, just a few words, but there was something about it that made her feel as though he truly understood her. There was no pressure in his message, no expectation. It was just care, genuine care. She hadn't experienced that from anyone in a long time. She quickly typed a response, her fingers moving faster than her mind could process. "Thanks, Alex. I appreciate it. I'm okay. Just a lot on my mind." She hit send before she could overthink it, but almost immediately another message came through from him. "I get it, but remember, you don't have to do everything alone. Whenever you're ready, I'm here." Mira read his words again, and for the first time in a long time, she felt the walls she had so carefully constructed begin to crumble, piece by piece. She wanted to believe him, to trust him. But fear gripped her heart. What if it was all too good to be true? What if he was just another person who would let her down, like so many others before him? She set the phone down, her mind racing. It felt like she was standing at the edge of something important, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to take the leap. Could she really let someone in? Could she really trust someone after all these years of keeping her heart closed? Off the next day, Mira arrived at the cafe for her shift, her thoughts still consumed by Alex. She tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept drifting back to him. Every time she walked past the window, she half expected to see him standing outside, watching her. But he wasn't there, and for some reason, that made her feel more uneasy than if he had been. The day dragged on. There were the usual customers, the usual orders, the usual routine. But nothing felt the same. Everything was out of sync, as though her world was spinning in a direction she wasn't prepared for. The truth was, Mira was scared. She was scared of what Alex was offering her. She was scared of what it might mean for her to let him in, to let anyone in. As the evening approached, she began to close up the cafe, wiping down the counters and organizing the chairs. The cafe had emptied out, leaving her alone in the dim light of the setting sun. It was always this way. She'd stay a little longer, cleaning up, taking her time. But today, something felt different. Today, the silence in the cafe felt suffocating. And then, just as she was about to lock the door, she saw him. Alex. He stood outside, looking in through the window, his face partially obscured by the reflection of the dimming light. For a moment, Mira froze. It was as if time had stopped. Her heart raced and she wasn't sure why. He was just standing there, his hands in his pockets, waiting. She hesitated, then slowly walked toward the door, unlocking it. As the door swung open, Alex gave her a small, almost hesitant smile. "Hey," he said, his voice soft but confident. "I didn't want to interrupt your evening, but I was hoping we could talk. Just for a bit." Mira's breath caught in her throat. She had never felt this nervous around him before. "Sure," she said, stepping aside to let him in. Alex entered the cafe, his eyes scanning the space before they landed on her. "I didn't want to be too forward," he began, his voice sincere, "but I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other night. About not needing anyone." Mira felt her stomach churn. She had been avoiding this conversation, trying to bury it, but now it was here, right in front of her. "Alex, I didn't mean it like that," she said quickly. I've been on my own for so long. I don't know how to let someone in." "I get it," Alex said, his tone softening. "I do. But you don't have to do it alone anymore. You don't have to carry everything by yourself. You deserve more than that, Mira." His words hit her harder than she expected. She felt a lump form in her throat, and for a moment she couldn't speak. She had been carrying the weight of her own world for so long that the idea of letting someone else help, letting someone else care, felt foreign, even frightening. "Why do you care so much?" she asked, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "Why are you still here?" Alex took a step closer to her, his expression serious now. "Because I see you, Mira. I see the way you carry everything, the way you pretend like you don't need anyone. And I'm here because I want to help. Not because I expect anything from you, just because I care." Mira's heart raced as she looked into his eyes. There was no pretension, no hidden agenda. There was only honesty, raw and unguarded. It was like he had peeled away the layers of doubt and fear that had held her back for so long, and in their place was something real. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered, the weight of her words sinking in. "I don't know how. To trust again. You don't have to figure it all out right now," Alex said gently. "You just have to take the first step, and I'll be here for you whenever you're ready." Mira stood there for a long moment, her thoughts spinning, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to take that first step. But she was scared. Scared of what it might mean. Scared of getting hurt again. "I don't know if I'm ready," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's okay," Alex replied, his voice warm and reassuring. "You don't have to be ready right now. Just know that I'm here." Mira nodded slowly, her mind still racing, but something had shifted inside her. Maybe, just maybe, she was ready to let go of the past. Maybe she was ready to take that first step. For the first time in a long time, Mira felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't sure where it would lead, but she knew one thing for certain. Alex had made her believe that it was possible to move forward, to trust again. The following weeks felt like a whirlwind, yet everything seemed to slow down in a way that Mira couldn't quite explain. She had allowed herself to open up to Alex, something she never thought she'd do. The walls she had spent years building were slowly coming down, piece by piece, and with each piece that fell, she felt both a sense of freedom and vulnerability she had never known before. She had always prided herself on being self-sufficient, on handling everything alone. She had never wanted to depend on anyone, never wanted to be the person who needed saving. But Alex had changed that. His unwavering support, his constant presence, and his simple kindness had shown her that it was okay to need someone. It was okay to lean on someone, to allow them to help carry the burden, to let them see the parts of herself she had hidden for so long. They spent more time together now. Lunches, walks in the park, late-night conversations. With every moment they shared, Mira felt herself growing closer to him, her heart opening in ways she hadn't thought possible. But even as she began to trust him more, the questions still lingered. Why had Alex come into her life? What had motivated him to offer her his help and his time? His life, from what she could tell, was far different from hers. He was successful, well-connected, and confident in a way that Mira couldn't quite relate to. He had everything she thought she would never have: stability, wealth, a network of people who cared about him. And yet, he had chosen to spend time with her. One evening, as they sat in the small cafe that Mira had grown to love, Alex finally broke the silence. They had been talking about everything and nothing, their usual conversations filled with laughter, light-hearted teasing and moments of quiet understanding. But this time, something felt different. Alex seemed more serious than usual, his eyes searching hers, his lips pressed together in a tight line. "Mira," he began, his voice steady, but tinged with something deeper. "There's something I need to tell you." Mira's heart skipped a beat. Her breath caught in her throat as she looked up at him, her hands suddenly cold. The light in the cafe flickered, casting shadows on the walls, and the moment felt heavier than it should have. She had known this conversation was coming. The weight of his words hung in the air between them, filling the space with tension she could almost taste. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alex sighed, leaning back in his chair, his hands clasped in front of him. For a moment, he seemed to be collecting his thoughts, as though choosing his words carefully. "I've been thinking a lot about this, about us, Mira, and I know you've been through a lot. I know you've built your life on your own terms, but I think you deserve more than that. You deserve someone who sees you, who values you for everything you are, not just for what you can do for yourself, but for who you are at your core." Mira's chest tightened. She wasn't sure where this was going, but she could feel the ground beneath her shifting. Alex's gaze never left hers, and the sincerity in his eyes made her heart ache. She had known that Alex cared about her, but hearing it like this made everything feel more real. Too real. "I don't need saving," she said quickly, almost defensively, her voice a little stronger than she intended. "I'm not someone who needs someone to take care of them." "I know," Alex replied gently, "and that's not what I'm offering. I'm not offering to save you, Mira. I'm offering to stand beside you, to support you in the ways you need, not the ways you think you want." Mira's eyes welled with tears, though she didn't want to show it. She didn't want to let him see how deeply his words affected her. She had spent so long convincing herself that she didn't need anyone, that she could do everything on her own. But now, here was Alex, offering something different, something she hadn't known she wanted until it was right in front of her. "I've been thinking a lot about why I came into your life, Mira," Alex continued, his voice softer now, as though he was revealing something deeply personal. "And the truth is, I didn't expect to feel so strongly about you. I didn't expect to want to be a part of your life the way I do now. But I do. I care about you, Mira, more than I thought possible." Mira's heart beat faster in her chest. She wanted to say something, wanted to tell him how much that meant to her, but the words caught in her throat. For so long, she had kept her emotions bottled up, afraid to let anyone in, afraid to show vulnerability. But here, with Alex, she felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in years, she felt as though she could be seen, truly seen, without the walls she had built around herself. "I care about you too," she whispered, the words escaping her before she could stop them. "But I don't know if I'm ready for this." Alex reached across the table, his hand gently touching hers. "You don't have to be ready right now. I'm not asking for anything more than what you're willing to give. I just want you to know that I'm here for you, in whatever way you need me to be." Mira looked at him, her heart full of conflicting emotions. She wanted to trust him, wanted to believe that what he was offering was real. But she was still scared, scared of getting hurt, scared of opening herself up to someone who might disappoint her. But deep down, she knew she couldn't keep running from the possibility of something better, something real. "What if I let myself fall for you?" she asked quietly, her voice shaky. "What if I open myself up to you and it doesn't work? What if I get hurt?" Alex's expression softened, and he leaned in slightly, his eyes searching hers. "Mira, there are no guarantees in life, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't take a chance. If you keep holding on to the fear of getting hurt, you'll never know what it feels like to truly live. And I'm not asking you to take a leap of faith on me. I'm asking you to take a step forward towards something that could be real." Mira swallowed hard, her breath shallow. She had spent so long running from her own emotions, from the possibility of love, that the idea of letting herself go felt foreign. But in that moment, as she looked into Alex's eyes, she realized that maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running, time to stop hiding behind the walls she had built, time to let herself be vulnerable. "I don't know what the future holds," she said softly, her voice steadying, "but I'm willing to find out. With you." Alex smiled, a smile that reached all the way to his eyes. It wasn't a triumphant smile, or one filled with expectation. It was a smile that said, "I understand." It was a smile that made Mira feel as though everything was going to be okay. "Thank you, Mira," he said softly. "That's all I needed to hear." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Mira allowed herself to believe in something beyond her fears. She allowed herself to trust Alex, to trust that maybe, just maybe, she could let him in and find something beautiful in the process. As the weeks passed, their relationship deepened. Mira and Alex spent more time together, sharing their hopes, their dreams, and their fears. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, moments where Mira questioned whether she was doing the right thing. But Alex was patient, always there, always understanding. And slowly, Mira began to realize that she was no longer afraid of opening her heart. She had learned that love wasn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It was about trust, vulnerability, and the willingness to take a chance on someone, even when the future was uncertain. In the end, Mira discovered that the greatest strength wasn't in keeping others out, but in allowing herself to be open to the possibilities that love could offer. And with Alex by her side, she finally understood that she didn't have to face the world alone. The end.